Most players consider Malefic Roar as a late game item, and therefore only buy it as a 5th or last item in their builds. This idea isn't necessarily wrong, since Malefic Roar's effective damage relies heavily on its scaling with enemies' physical defenses, which are naturally higher during the late game. Today, I want to show you if you should actually be considering getting Malefic Roar much earlier than the late game or not. Malefic Roar's total physical penetration stats is split into two passives. The first passive grants 35% physical penetration, while the second grants a 0.05% physical penetration for each point of the target's physical defense. For example, if the target has 200 physical defense, the total physical penetration percentage of the two passives combined is 35% plus 0.05% multiplied by 200, which gives us a total of 45%. We then use this result and multiply it with the target's physical defense, which is 200, giving us a total of 90 physical penetration. Well, you might be thinking, what does this number even mean? And how does the penetration stats translate into actual damage? In order for us to look at Malefic Roar in terms of damage, I would like us to take a deep look into 3 different heroes that each have a different damage profile and role in the team, so that we can have a wide perspective of Malefic Roar's effectiveness. So let's begin with Pakido, who is a physical XP laner. We will consider his damage for a combo of Enhanced Skill 2 into Ult, Skill 2, Skill 1, then Enhanced Skill 2 again. We'll first be looking at him from the early game at level 7, which is when most heroes are getting their first tier 3 item. I'll also be using the Assassin Emblem, which is a common choice for Pakito players and gives us extra 15 physical attack and 19.5 physical penetration. Now here's the damage chart for him with all that considered. What we can see here from the charts is that Hunter Strike or Malefic Roar as Pakito's first item will have about equal damage when the enemy target has around 55 physical defense. At this stage of the game, you can expect the base physical defense of the average hero in Mobile Legends to be around 40 to 45, which means Hunter Strike is definitely the better choice against enemies who chose not to build any physical defense at all. However, in recent times, enemies have become smarter, and even gold laners are starting to prioritize building an extremely powerful and cheap physical defense item known as the Steel Leg Plates, which gives 45 physical defense. If you have watched my defense guide before, you will know what I'm talking about. If the enemy has bought Steel Leg Plates, we are looking at Malefic Roar winning against Hunter Strike with about a 9% increase in damage. Another common defensive item to consider is Dominance Ice, which many XP laners and roamers opt for as a first item. In this case, a typical enemy will have around 110 to 115 physical defense with Dominance Ice during the early game, of which Malefic Roar has around 14% more damage than Hunter Strike. As we can see, Malefic Roar can actually be a worthy item to consider even in the early stages of the game, but it's provided that the enemy builds physical defense, which is actually very common at high levels of play, especially in the current tank meta landscape. And of course, if you're playing in the XP lane, it's very common that the opposing XP laner has already bought Steel Leg Plates or even Dominance Ice at this stage. Now what you're sacrificing to get Malefic Roar's extra damage is the 10% cooldown reduction and movement speed passive from Hunter Strike. So I have to ask you to be the judge on whether the damage increase is a worthy trade for these utilities. And just so you can see the comparison in action, let me show you how it looks like in game. As we can see, at base physical defense, Hunter Strike does slightly more damage than Malefic Roar. Now let's see how it goes against a gold laner who has Steel Leg Plates. Now we can see Malefic Roar wins in damage against an enemy who wised up and bought Steel Leg Plates. Okay, now let's see how we do against an XP laner with Dominance Ice. Malefic Roar now does significantly more damage against an enemy who has already built Dominance Ice. This proves that Malefic Roar is actually viable even in the early game. Moving on to the mid game, we are now assuming Pakito is level 10 and has already chosen to pick up Hunter Strike as the first item. Now the next item consideration for most Pakito players will most likely be to go for Bloodlust X for the Spell Vamp. Well, here's the damage chart showing the difference between Bloodlust X and Malefic Roar. We can see Bloodlust X equals Malefic Roar's damage at only around an astonishing 5 physical defense on the enemy target. At level 10, we are expecting the base physical defense of most enemies to already be around 60 to 65, of which Malefic Roar outdamages Bloodlust X by around a hefty 17%. With Steel Leg Plates, the difference increases to around 27%, while with Dominance Ice, this increases further to around 31%. Now that's a huge damage difference. Now at this point in the mid game, some enemies, especially tank junglers or even some tank XP laners, may have already built 2 physical defense items. Let's suppose it's Dominance Ice and another Steel Leg Plates. we'll be looking at around 175 to 180 physical defense on them, of which Malefic Roar outdamages Bloodlust Axe by a whopping 40%. Now again, we are sacrificing Bloodlust Axe's Spellvamp passive and 10% cooldown reduction in exchange for the extra damage from Malefic Roar. So you'll have to evaluate by yourself which is more important at that point of the game. But it definitely shows how Malefic Roar should be considered much earlier than a 5th or 6th item. So let's move on to the late game where Pakido is level 15. And suppose we now have Hunter Strike and Bloodlust Axe as our damage items. Some players may consider to go for Blade of Despair next, since it gives the most physical attack. But is that really the right option? Let's have a look at the damage chart. As we can see, Blade of Despair does equal damage to Malefic Roar at around 35 physical defense. The typical enemy you will face in Mobile Legends will have a base physical defense of around 80 to 85 at level 15, of which Malefic Roar wins in damage by around 12%, making it a clear winner here. Against most squishy targets who tend to build just Immortality in the late game, the damage gap increases to around 15%. And against tanky targets who tend to build Dominance Eyes and Blade Armor for the late game, you can expect the damage gap to be around 37%. This is of course not taking into account Blade of Despair's passive, which increases your physical attack by 25% against a target that has less than 50% HP. But personally, I'd go for Malefic Roar's non-conditional damage increase any day over a conditional one. And of course, we're not going to do the comparison with just a single hero, which obviously doesn't give enough context. So let's do another hero. Saber is a physical damage jungler who has physical defense reduction in his passive. He can reduce enemies' physical defense by 3 to 8 every time he hits an enemy, which can stack up to 5 times. Physical defense reduction effects can mess with Malefic Roar's usual penetration amount, since reduction calculations are prioritized over penetration calculations, which means Malefic Roar's percentage penetration effect in theory has diminishing returns when paired with such defense reduction effects. Well, let's check out how big of an effect it really has. For Saber, the damage combo we'll use for the calculations will be activated skill 1 and 2 into his ult and a single basic attack after that. And same as we did for Pakido, we are going to assess him starting from the early game at level 7. And we'll be using the assassin emblem on him as well, with 15 extra physical attack and 19.5 extra physical penetration. And here's his damage chart for the early game. The first items we are considering for him are Blade of Heptasis, which is the light blue line, Hunter Strike, which is the purple line, and Malefic Roar, which is the brown line. As we can see here, Malefic Roar equals Hunter Strike's damage when your target enemy has around 60 physical defense. This is only slightly different to that of Pakido, where the breakpoint was around 55 physical defense. For Blade of Heptasis, the point of equal damage is around 90 physical defense. I must mention that I included Blade of Heptasis passive in the damage formula, which does extra burst physical damage after a basic attack, since you should be able to trigger it in most scenarios. Since the typical level 7 enemy only has base stats of around 40 to 45 physical defense, Malefic Roar loses out in damage to Hunter Strike by around 6% at that stage, and around 13% to Blade of Heptasis. Suppose the enemy has built Steel Leg Plates though, Malefic Roar actually beats Hunter Strike in damage by around 9%, while Blade of Heptasis still wins, but only marginally by around 1%. Against a tanky enemy with Dominance Eyes, we're looking at around a 13% damage increase against Hunter Strike or around 4% against Blade of Heptasis. Moving on to the mid game, we are assuming that we have bought Blade of Heptasis, and we're at level 10 now. Here is the damage chart for Saber in the mid game. At this stage, players may be opting to go for Blade of Despair, but I'm using 2 Legion Swords, which are the components to Blade of Despair, since it's more fair to compare them in gold cost, as Blade of Despair costs about 1000 more gold. So with Hunter Strike, we can equal the damage with Malefic Roar if the target enemy has around 60 physical defense, while it is around 40 physical defense with 2 Legion Swords. Since enemies will have around 60 to 65 physical defense at this stage, Malefic Roar will outdamage both these items against any enemies that have invested in physical defense items. Specifically, if the enemy has Steel Leg Plates, we're looking at around a 13% damage increase if you had Malefic Roar over both Hunter Strike and 2 Legion Swords. And the damage increase scales to around 21% against Hunter Strike and around 18% against 2 Legion Swords if the enemy has Dominance Eyes. I must remind you again that what you're sacrificing for the extra damage from Malefic Roar is Hunter Strike's movement speed passive and 10% cooldown reduction. So I'll leave it to you to decide what's more important. Personally, I would choose the extra damage for Saber, since he's pretty much a one-shot, one-kill hero. And finally, we arrive at the late game. We are assuming a level 15 Saber that has opted for Blade of Heptasis and Hunter Strike as his first 2 items. Now here's the damage chart in this scenario. We are comparing Blade of Despair, since that's a pretty common item for Saber players to go for at this stage. As we can see, it's not even close, as Blade of Despair equals Malefic Roar's damage at around 40 physical defense. Enemies at this stage will have an average of around 80 to 85 physical defense, where Malefic Roar outdamages Blade of Despair by around 35%, so there's not really much to consider here. For a squishy target who has built Immortality, the damage increase is around 40%, and for targets with Dominance Eyes, it will be around 47%. For even beefier targets who have Dominance Eyes and Blade Armor, we're looking at around a 60% damage gap between Malefic Roar and Blade of Despair. From the results, Malefic Roar is a clear winner over Blade of Despair for Saber in the late game, whether the enemy has built physical defenses or not. So we can see, even though Saber will experience diminishing returns while using Malefic Roar due to his physical defense reduction passive, it is not enough to affect Malefic Roar's overall effectiveness despite that. Now for the last hero I'd like to show, we chose a physical damage marksman who can really hit pretty hard. We are considering Clint at level 7 with no items at this stage. And we'll be using the marksman emblem with 29 extra physical attack and 6 extra physical penetration. He'll be doing a combo of skill 1 into basic attack, then 2 uses of his skill tree followed by a basic attack after each skill tree. This procs his passive 3 times during the combo. Here is the damage chart for him in the early game considering this combo. At this stage of the game, we can see that Malefic Roar does equal damage to Hunter Strike at around 60 physical defense, and Blade of Heptasis at around 85 physical defense. Since enemies have around 40 to 45 base physical defense at this stage, Malefic Roar should not be considered if enemies are not building physical defense yet. But if they do build Steel Leg Plates, Malefic Roar will have around 6% more damage than Hunter Strike, but will do roughly similar damage to Blade of Heptasis. Against an enemy who has built Dominance Eyes, we're looking at around a 12% damage increase compared to Hunter Strike and around 5% more than Blade of Heptasis. Now let's move on to the mid game when Clint is level 10, and we are assuming that we have Blade of Heptasis as our first item. Here is the damage chart for the mid game. I'm bringing in Endless Battle, since Clint players regularly build this item, so let's take it into consideration. From the chart, we can see that Malefic Roar equals Hunter Strike's damage at around 55 physical defense. What really stands out is that Endless Battle's entire curve is ahead of Malefic Roar, and we don't get equal damage between the two items until the enemy has around 210 physical defense. This is pretty much an outlier, since most of the items we have considered so far has equaled Malefic Roar's damage at less than 100 physical defense at any stage of the game, and Endless Battle absolutely stomps on this precedent. This is because Clint is a special case who is able to abuse the true damage passive of Endless Battle, which gives him and Endless Battle the edge in this damage comparison. Anyways, at base physical defense, enemies at level 10 will have an average of around 60 to 65 physical defense, where Malefic Roar has around 3% more damage than Hunter Strike, and loses to Endless Battle by around 6%. For an enemy with Steel Leg Plates, we're looking at around 13% more damage than Hunter Strike, and around 3% less damage than Endless Battle. Against an enemy with Dominance Eyes, it's around 19% more damage than Hunter Strike, and around 2% less damage than Endless Battle. And finally, against a very tanky enemy with Dominance Eyes and Blade Armor, we're looking at around 35% more damage than Hunter Strike, and roughly equal damage with Endless Battle. Obviously, this makes Endless Battle the clear winner in this scenario, since in addition to beating Malefic Roar in damage for up to 210 physical defense, it also provides several useful attributes such as physical lifesteal, cooldown reduction, and mana regen, which are all very useful to Clint. This is one of the rare cases that Malefic Roar is not a consideration for the mid game, since Endless Battle works too perfectly on Clint. Moving on, we are looking at a level 15 Clint for the late game. We are of course assuming he already has Blade of Heptasis and Endless Battle as his first two items. Now let's take a look at the damage chart, and we are adding in Blade of Despair for consideration, since it's a common item for Clint. In this scenario, Malefic Roar equals Hunter Strike's damage at around 55 physical defense again, and Blade of Despair at around 85 physical defense. Since enemies at level 15 will have an average of around 80 to 85 physical defense, Hunter Strike is not even a consideration at all, while Blade of Despair will have about equal damage with Malefic Roar against enemies with no physical defense items. Suppose a squishy enemy builds Immortality, Malefic Roar will do around 8% more damage than Hunter Strike, and around 2% more damage than Blade of Despair. Against an enemy with Dominance Eyes, we are looking at around 15% more damage than Hunter Strike, and around 6% more damage than Blade of Despair. And against a very tanky enemy with Dominance Eyes and Blade Armor, is around 23% more damage than Hunter Strike, and around 12% more than Blade of Despair. So what can we learn from everything we have seen so far? Well, Malefic Roar is a great item if you are looking for more damage even in the mid game as a second or third item, especially when enemies have built physical defense, which is very common nowadays in the tank meta. The key here is to always make sure to check what enemies are building during a game to ensure you are building the best item for that scenario. Oftentimes though, Malefic Roar is one of the, if not the top option if you're looking to maximize your damage. We also know very well that Malefic Roar has a magic counterpart, which is the Divine Glaive, but we also know that Divine Glaive has a sister item that is known as the Genius Wand. How do these two items compare? And are there situations that one is better than the other? You can find out the answer by clicking on this video right here. As always, good luck on your games, and I'll see you again soon.